We have a huge frontal lobe, and it's 40% of our entire brain. And most people, when they have a thought, they just think that that's the truth. And I think one of my greatest realizations in my own journey was just because you have a thought doesn't necessarily mean it's true. So if you think 60 to 70,000 thoughts in one day, and we do, and 90% of those thoughts are the same thoughts as the day before, and you believe that your thoughts have something to do with your destiny, your life's not going to change very much, because the same thought leads to the same choice leads to the same behavior creates the same experience, and the same experience produces the same emotion. And so then the act of becoming conscious of this process to begin to become more aware of how you think, how you act, and how you feel, it's called metacognition. And so then why is that important? Because the more conscious you become of those unconscious states of mind and body, the less likely you're going to go unconscious during the day. And that thought is not going to slip by your awareness unchecked, because it means to know thyself. The word meditation means to become familiar with. So as you become familiar with the thoughts, the behaviors, and the emotions of the old self, you're retiring that old self. As you fire and wire new thoughts and condition the body into a new emotional state, if you do that enough times, it'll begin to become familiar to you. So it's so important, just like a garden. If you're planting a garden, you got to get rid of the weeds. You got to take the plants from the past year and you got to pull them out. The rocks that sift to the top that are like our emotional blocks, they have to be removed. The soil has to be tenderized and broken down. We have to make room to plant a new garden. So primarily, we learn the most about ourselves and others when we're uncomfortable. Because the moment you move into that uncomfortable state, normally a program jumps in. When that program jumps in, it's because the person doesn't want to be in the present moment and engage it consciously. So when you teach people how to do that with a meditative process, it turns out that when they're in their life, they're less likely to emotionally react. They're less likely to be so rigid and believe the thoughts they were thinking. They're more aware of when they go unconscious back into a habit, and that is what starts the process of change. And so we have to unlearn before we relearn. We have to break the habit of the old self before we reinvent a new self. We have to prune synaptic connections and sprout new connections. We have to unfire and unwire and refire and rewire. We have to unmemorize emotions that are stored in the body, then recondition the body to a new mind and to a new emotion, like deprogram and reprogram. That's the act, and it's a two-step process.
Yeah, I like the way that you call that out as an action. There was another thing that you said that I thought was really powerful about how insights themselves are essentially inert. They don't do anything. What then do we do with an insight? How do we take a breakthrough moment and make sure that it's not just a breakthrough moment? Like, I guarantee people watching right now are having like 100 aha moments. For sure, that was definitely the case for me as I was researching you. And when you said that, I was like, and that's the danger, that you have the aha and then nothing.
Yeah, and it is a danger, because then people will shrink back into mediocrity, and they'll use the insight to excuse them from taking a leap. They'll say, yeah, I have a chemical imbalance in my brain. Yeah, my father was really overbearing. He was a perfectionist. That's why I am the way I am. People, they come up with stuff to excuse themselves. The insight is actually giving them permission to stay limited. And it's an amazing idea, because they'll say to you that they really want to get over their anxiety. But let's take your ex-husband, let's put him in a straitjacket, let's duct tape him and shoot him to the moon. Now what? What are you going to do now? You still have to make those changes. And so then when the person's enemy dies, or something shifts in their life, and that person's gone, they'll find another person to hate. This is just how we function as human beings. We just slide another reason to feel those emotions. So I think when people start to understand this, I think knowledge is power, but knowledge about yourself is self-empowerment. Believe in human possibility, human potential, and I think that one of our biggest limiting beliefs is the belief of how limited we really are. And so my interest is to give people the science to begin to understand how powerful they really are. And I think that science really is the language that does that really well. And the new sciences like quantum physics and neuroplasticity, neuroscience, neuroendocrinology, psychoneuroimmunology, the mind-body connection, epigenetics, all of those sciences point the finger at possibilities. So I want to create a language for people from a philosophical or theoretical standpoint for them to begin to understand what's possible. But then I want to be able to have those people begin to wire that information in their brain completely, because learning is making new connections, right, in the brain. But remembering is maintaining and sustaining those connections, and it's so much easier to lose our vision than to remember it, right? So then we have to begin to hardwire the brain or install the neurological hardware in preparation for an experience. So the more people understand what they're doing and why, then the how gets easier. So I want to then set up the conditions in an environment, in a workshop where people can begin to apply or personalize what they learn so that they can have an experience. An experience then further enriches the brain. But the prize of an experience is an emotion. And once you start feeling unlimited, once you start feeling abundant, once you start feeling worthy, now you're teaching your body chemically to understand what your mind has intellectually understood. So knowledge is for the mind and experiences for the body, and people begin to embody the truth of that philosophy. Now, if they can repeat it over and over again, it'll become innate in them. It'll become natural, second nature, it'll become easy. They'll begin to master that philosophy. So I want people to begin to understand that thoughts are very powerful, feelings drive our thoughts, and that they can begin to create a better life for themselves once they understand some of these principles. I think we're living in such an amazing time right now. I mean, if you are not being challenged in some way in your life, you're not alive. And all of this is an initiation. And I don't believe that you have to go to any school of ancient wisdom perched in the Himalayas or for information or training any longer. If you see your life as the school, as the initiation, then you can no longer be a victim to your life. You're going to have to meet the challenges in your life from a greater level of mind, greater than the mind that created it. And so there have been plenty of peer-reviewed articles on the power of peace-gathering projects that lower crime, that lower trauma incidences of death and economic growth. It's all related to what's happening right now for us. And it's not enough, though, for us to just focus on peace and expect the world to change, because in the peace-gathering projects, when the event was over, a lot of the crime and violence returned back to its ceiling level again. It's more important for us not only to embody that peace and feel it, but then to demonstrate it. And when we begin to demonstrate it, I think we give people permission to do the same. That means that we can't be preaching peace and then be stuck in traffic and, flipping people off or arguing with your coworker. You don't get to stand up for peace if you have conflict in your life. So when we start that self-contemplative process of looking within, and instead of judging someone or something, look to see if there's an aspect of ourselves within that person or within that situation that we may need to change. And if we're all doing that at the same time, something greater, a greater consciousness is going to emerge. And so I believe that it should never be about a person. It should be about principles. And when we stand up for principles, that creates community. Because you could be one belief or another belief, but if you're sharing the same principles, which are joy and freedom and cooperation and connection, that's what builds communities. So then, everything in our world right now is reminding us of separation. Whether it's war, whether it's violence, whether it's political deceit, whether it's prejudice, all of those things cause us to live by those stress hormones. And when we're living in that state of survival, we're not trusting, and we become more selfish. So then, starting our day asking ourselves, what would be the greatest expression of myself I'd like to present to the world? and then making the choice to not get up until we are that person, I think that begins to demonstrate greatness. And when there is adversity and when there are challenges in our life, the question, of course, becomes, how do we become supernatural? And that means we're going to have to do what feels unnatural at first. When everybody else is in poverty and lack, that's the time to give. When everybody else is in fear and vigilance, that's the time to show courage. When people are angry and hating and prejudiced, that's the time to show compassion. When people are competing to rush to get to the top, that's the time to change your energy and draw the experience to you. And if you keep doing what's unnatural over and over again, sooner or later you're going to become supernatural. You were up and dressed and ready to go before your parents were up. You know why? Because you knew something unexpected was going to happen. That's how we should live our lives, waking up with the understanding to expect the unexpected. Think of your autonomic nervous system as the automatic nervous system. And I've been saying for years that autonomic is synonymous with automatic, and it's that part of our systems, a part of our nervous system that functions behind the scenes of our awareness, and it regulates body temperature and hormones and blood supply and blood sugar levels, and it happens without any of our conscious mind. So in the autonomic nervous system, there are two branches. So one is the sympathetic nervous system, and its job is for protection from threats and dangers in our outer environment. And think of the sympathetic nervous system as the gas pedal. And when there's a danger to the gross anatomy of the body by something in our outer world that we can perceive with our senses, this system is switched on automatically, and once it turns on, there's a host of physiological functions that begin to happen automatically. And when that occurs, we're mobilizing all of the body's energy, all of the body's resources for that threat or that danger to deal with it. And when it's switched on, we don't go half in, we go all the way in, because we have to make sure that the body is going to survive in a threat or a danger in the outer environment. And when there's a release of all those adrenal hormones, we're tapping the body's resources and we're mobilizing all of its energy. And pupils dilate, salivary juices shut off, respiratory rate increases, heart rate increases, blood is sent to the extremities, glucose is mobilized, the immune system dials up and then it dials down. And all of these systems switching on and turning on is to be able to allow the body to adapt to some threat in the outer world. And that is the gas pedal. And the sympathetic nervous system, or the fight or flight nervous system, causes us to really do just a few things: to run from the danger, to fight and stay, or to freeze and hide. And those are the primary choices that we have created in evolution. And so when the sympathetic nervous system is switched on, and as we've been saying for a very long time, the short-term effect of the hormones of stress, the body can adapt and return back to balance, and it switches on the other nervous system, that branch of the autonomic nervous system called the parasympathetic nervous system. And think of that nervous system as the brake or the clutch. This is where the body conserves energy. This is where it utilizes nutrients and transports chemicals to cells, and metabolism goes up. And this is a time for growth. This is a time for repair. This is a time for restoration. And there's a delicate balance between the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. And so then when you're feeling constant fear, when you're feeling constant anger or aggression, when you're feeling constant pain and suffering, and you're living by the hormones of stress, what was once very adaptive is now very maladaptive, because if stress is knocking your brain and body out of balance, and the stress response is what the body does to return it back to order. If we're living in constant fear, then we are tapping the body's vital resources, and there's no energy for growth, repair, restoration. There's no energy for long-term building projects.
The hardest part about change is not making the same choice as you did the day before. And the moment you decide to no longer think the same way, make the same choice, act the same way, create the same experience, or live by the same emotion, it's going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel unfamiliar. There is going to be a certain amount of uncertainty and unpredictability. And the moment you feel uncomfortable, you just stepped into the river of change. Now, most people, the moment they feel uncomfortable, they return back to the familiar state of the mind and body. They start thinking the same way, acting the same way, feeling the same way, and they say, this feels right. No, in fact, that feels familiar. Now, going from the old self to the new self is the neurological, is the chemical, is the biological, is the hormonal, and even genetic death of the old self. That void, that place of uncertainty, that unknown, is the perfect place to create it. And if you and I can become comfortable in that unknown and begin to decide who we do want to be. In other words, many people say when they're in that unknown, I can't predict my future. This doesn't feel right. Well, the best way to predict your future is to create it, not in the known, but in the unknown. So what if you said now, what thoughts do I want to fire and wire in my brain? What behaviors do I want to demonstrate? And if you were to close your eyes and begin to think about how you are going to act, the mere act of mentally rehearsing who you're going to be begins to install the neurological circuits in your brain to look like the experience has already occurred. Now, what that means is that the brain is primed in its circuitry to no longer be living in the past, but now living in the future.